So thank you all so much for being here and for attending our sessions today. So next we have Earle Hager from the Neutrino Donut, which is a management and consulting firm for commercialization of science and tech companies. Earle is going to be talking about providing a detailed overview of the SBIR process from the applicant's point of view. And we have Earle here in person. Thank you, Earle.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about how the SBIR process works and provide some pointers and tips. And I want to talk to you about two superpowers. One is there's a gentleman named Bernie Schwartz out of New York City. And if you went to Bernie Schwartz's house, you saw pictures of him standing next to all these famous people. One day he was asked to take the limousine that was going to drive the Pope around New York City. And so he did. And there was a picture above the fold of the New York Times the next day of him next to the Pope. And everyone said the same thing. They said, who's the guy next to Bernie Schwartz? I'm Bernie Schwartz. I know people. I know lots of people. I know how to connect people. I know where they are. That is my information there. I have 15,000 LinkedIn connections. If you want to send me a LinkedIn connection, you should, because I can help. You can tap into my network and tap into lots of people. I make money on this, and I'm going to tell you that LinkedIn is an effective tool in this respect. That's me and a few friends at the Caltech bookstore. I was there when Hawking was giving a presentation the night before, and then we ran into him at the bookstore a couple of days later, and that was a truly awesome thing. Okay, so let's get started on these things. So let's jump ahead. I have this slideshow. It is available if you want to get a copy of it. Ask Kara, and she will provide it. So we're going to talk about some of the magic words in an SBIR process. I'm trying to skip through the information that was presented by other folks, and so I'm going to take an attempt at this, but if it doesn't work, raise your hand, ask questions, and we'll jump on it. First off, when you're writing a grant application, the word aims is a very important word. Aims are the things that you say you're going to prove when you're doing your application. They need to be robust. They need to be demonstrated on what you're trying to do, and you have to prove what success is. You want to start broadly, but you want to get into the specifics of saying, we're going to prove these three things. And 3 or 4 robust aims are very important. If you're writing on the NIH site, the Bioscience Writers website, and if you have my presentation, that's a link. And other things underlined like that are also links. But it takes you through. You give your aim a title, you do a summary of what you're trying to do, and say, this is how we're going to accomplish it, and this is what success looks like. They're the 3 things associated with an aim. So here's an example. Aim 1, we're going to establish an innovative mouse model for that. And we'll be targeting vectors, and then we will, and with the results are the area highlighted in red. This is an example of what an aim is, the 3 parts to an aim. You've got the title, you've got the strategy, and you've got the outcome or the impact. If you're writing software, you're going to say, we need to prove this is what we're trying to do with the upgrade to the software. The second thing is how we're going to do it. And third is, what are the results? Everything has those 3 parts, and it's a very critical part of the aims process. This is the size of the SBIR process, $51 billion since fiscal year 2018. And it is 3% of the federal research budget. The majority of the grants are phase 1 awards, but the largest amount of money are the phase 2 awards. So the volume is 72% for phase 1 and 68% of the funding goes to the phase 2. The funding is for a startup company in the SBIR program. This is important when you're working with the universities and university professors that have got to create a company. Frequently, the university rules say the professor can't be the president of the company, but they can be a key person within the company. They can, also be the PI, and their lab can receive the funding for the SBIR project. They can do lots of things, they can make lots of money, and they can control the company, but they can't be the president. And the president, that's a manageable problem to take care of. This is the one thing people miss, is the military. The military has research projects. The military does a lot of things for what they call the warfighter. This is important because in the medical arena, they're taking care of the warfighter. I was just on a thing where they were dealing with prenatal and postnatal depression and how to manage that for the warfighters to get them back and get them through this process. They're doing a lot of work with orthopedics, but they're also dealing with, neonatal all the way through death. There's a lot of programs that are going on in the military end of things, and you really, if you're looking in whatever it is you're looking for, you need to see if there's a military aspect to it, because that is a second funding source. So there's the broad agency announcement portal for the Department of Defense. So BAA is the term to look for, and this is a way of looking up the different opportunities that are there. The funding announcements are allocated CDMRP, Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs is what it's called. You can also reach out to the different labs, the Army Research Lab, the Navy Research Labs, et cetera, and find out what they're doing and find opportunities to work with them. You need to understand the programs. Now, there's different rules when you're dealing with the military, because the civilian people can talk to you more frequently. The military folks have a limited window in which they're allowed to share open conversations with you. And once those time periods have passed, they can't do anything more. The second thing is that whereas NIH and other folks have a pay line and generally don't pay anything that doesn't meet the pay line, the military has the option of funding what they think is important. And just because it doesn't make the pay line does not affect whether or not they decide to fund it. I'm on a number of grant review panels with the military, and one of the things that comes up is I'm evaluating the commercialization opportunities, and frequently there is no commercialization opportunity, but if it's important to the military, it gets funded. I'm not sure how much they went over the pay lines in the other presentations, but the pay line is the number in which they will be doing the grant award. The lower the number, the better you are. Frequently, the pay line will come in around 28 to 30, for example, on the NIH. Now, one of the things that takes place when you're dealing with the pay line is the September and January were the two NIH due dates. So one of the things that takes place is that if you get your grant proposal in soon in September, before the September deadline, you'll hear within a month or so whether or not you've made it. If you had a good presentation, you'll get feedback on what to do. And if it doesn't look like you're going to make it, you have a chance to fix things in time for the January deadline. This is an important step because it gives you a second shot at it, but you have to wait for the next deadline to do so. But it gives you a second shot. The part of the challenge is there's a whole different group of people who are evaluating it at that stage, which makes it a little more entertaining if you don't pass the second time. But it's important to know that getting it in and having a second shot at it consecutively gives you a better chance of fixing things. These are links to tutorials, and the SBIR program is really aggressively being pursued by these different agencies, and they're eager to find people who are submitting good ideas. So under each of these different agencies, you look up SBIR. The second magic word is topic. You've got to find a topic of interest. And you can't just say, I have an idea. You've got to find an idea that matches what they're looking for. And that's part of the discussion you'll have with the program managers, which is something I'm going to cover here. How's the pace, by the way, if anybody wants to throw into the comment? Okay. So as Jerry discussed before, you want to look up the different agencies and find out which agency is of interest. You'll find that NSF is looking for early stage technologies. And if it's a later stage, they might say, even if it's an energy technology, they might say, we're interested if it's early. If it gets further down the road, it's more of a DOE thing, and they'll send you off to the DOE. The nice part is that these guys all know each other, and they will all share information pretty easily. So you can go in and look at the different topic areas and do a search against that. You can search past topics of interest and what the past awards were and get an idea of what they were looking for previously. And that gives you an idea of what was funded and what, and perhaps they've fulfilled what they were looking for and they're not going to be funding anything more at this stage in that area. So I'm going to spend some time going into a deep dive on NIH grants because I had to pick one agency and I chose them. It's called the Laplace criterion, by the way. Laplace criterion is you have 5 options and you're going to take the one that I'm telling you to take. It was a very effective parenting technique. Grants process overview. So this is all stuff that's online on how to figure out what you're going to be doing on the process. They explain how to do it. They will get into font sizes and stuff like that. You should really pay attention to this. That's very important because they will reject you. And generally 11 and 12 points, certain paragraph spacing and 1-inch margins are basically what they do on there. But make sure you do that. People want to get paid. You can pay yourself in these programs, but it's very strictly controlled. And if too much of the grant is going towards salary, especially you, the founder's salary, it gets a little dicey. They don't like that. For the people doing their applications, there's a bio-sketch form, and pretty well everybody associated with the universities knows how to fill these out and has one ready to go, listing all of their activities, and that's part of the grant. So the online solicitation, this is the SBIR information for September 8th, January 5th, and April 5th, 2021. I put this together about a year or so ago, and I need to update it, obviously, but anyway, that's the breakdown of all the different topics that are out there in that document, and there was obviously a more current one. So if you go into the multiple program directors, you go into the, if you're looking at the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, which is where if you think your topic is located, you'll be able to find who are the program managers, what their phone numbers are, where their emails, and these people do return emails and they will answer questions. Or they will tell you why they can't answer questions, which is also what goes on there. But this information is there. You can find it. You can connect with the individuals that you need to connect with. So you want to get connected with these. You want to send your idea to these people, see what their feedback is. A very important part of the process is that they want to get rid of the flux capacitors. Everyone get what a flux capacitor is? Yes. Anyway, but they want to get rid of the junk because the junk takes up time. So what they're going to do is after you do your presentation, they'll invite you to apply. And so when you have that invitation to apply, that means they think your topic is of interest. They may also come back and say, this isn't of interest, which tells you don't bother applying. But I mean, there's an initial stage of qualifying yourself, which will save you the time of putting together a full proposal. So there's your specific aims that we talked about previously. There's a drive program, and there's all these other programs that are out there with accelerators that will help. And so now to getting into the weeds on these things, the topics, there are budget waivers that are out there, which means there are other topics that weren't a part of the original funding amount that are also available, and you can check the budget waivers to find out if your topic might be of interest in a budget waiver. So you can find those out there. So you can get $259 for phase 1 and $1.7 million for phase 2. Applications reviewed in study sections, and this tells you who the people are in the study section. The good news is you get to know who it is, see if somebody hates your guts or likes you. The bad news is when you resubmit the next quarter, there's probably a whole different study section. So there's individual reviewers. There's usually like 20 people in a review session, of which there's different groups, like 10 or so per room, and these 10 or so people are reviewing it. Now, part of the process that goes on there is that you're rating these things from 1 to 10, basically, and if you rate it as a 2 and everyone else rates it as a 7, you have to explain why you rated it as a 2. This matters because a lot of people feel that they've got railroaded by someone who didn't like them, but that's a little bit more of a challenge to do that because you have to justify why you were giving someone a negative review or why you gave someone a very, very high review without a good answer. So there's some stuff going there. The other thing is you can request another study session if you think there's a conflict of interest because you've worked closely with the person, or again, you had a fight in the hallway or something. I don't know. They were a Cowboys fan, and that just explains everything. So if you go into the list of review, you can find the list of reviewers for the small business computational modeling and biodata management. So you see the list of reviewers and who the senior scientific review officer is, and so you have an idea who the people are that are taking a look at your technology. So if there's an issue, you can request a different group. So phase 1, this is part of the whole process. And it's got to be important because it said process. But the whole process is that phase one, you're demonstrating that your idea has a scientific validity. Phase two, you're demonstrating that there's a commercial available. There's a commercial viability to your technology. In phase two, A and B are this thing is on the market, and I'm finding two different other markets for it, either a new one or an extension of the old one. But this is very important, especially for the folks that are going in the venture capital market, because you're getting validation that your technology is real. This is important because when you go out and you're trying to raise money, suddenly you may have customers, you have business, you have connections that are made, you're viable, you're not just an idea, you're actually a real business. And the fact that you're creating income makes you a little bit more interesting to these folks. So that's a good reason why the SBIR process is very good within the whole idea of raising venture money. Even if you're only applying and you get a yes back on a phase one, that helps you in talking with the venture people. And yes, I'm talking to you. So you can go through this. You can do a phase one, then a separate phase two application. You can do a fast track where you do the phase one, and after you do your three, after you complete your aims for your phase one, you're automatically entered into getting the phase two money released to you. Or you can jump to a phase two, and you go straight to a phase two if you have a viable product and you don't need to do the initial stage. All these things are options on how you want to proceed. Phase two grants require commercialization plans, and this is about planning, not execution. There was a lot of discussions in a couple of the other presentations about bringing people in, identifying people. You can identify people. You can also identify roles and say, when the money comes in, I need a business development person with these skills, and I'm going to hire them when the grant comes in. You don't need to have that person teed up for you. I missed the chat. Should we look at the chat comments? Is there anything? Sure. If you have a product that is pretty well complete and you're ready to take it into the marketplace, you can go straight to phase two. If you are still developing the scientific justification for the product, that's the phase one stage. So if you have something that's already out there, it's built, you can, and you're trying to take it to the marketplace, that's when you go straight to phase two. Fast track, that's where I explained what the fast track was, which is combining the phase one and phase two. And you'll say, after I complete my phase one aims, the phase one will be completed, and therefore then the money is automatically released for the phase two. Yes, I don't know. Okay, this is true of all the grant programs. You will talk to the program manager about what they would recommend doing. Other questions or? Okay. Thanks. So phase two grants get into the commercialization plans, and that's where the business information. Okay, this is where I make money. So we're going to spend some time on this. First off, I think we went through this with the other people. You have to incorporate, you get an EIN, you get the DUNS number, and you go sit through and go through SAM. And if it's an NIH project, you go through ERA Commons. Filling out the SAM form is a pain. Sorry, it is what it is. Deal with it. At the end of it, you have to send in a notarized letter to somebody in Kentucky. And at that point, your SAM registration is completed. But you better plan on this just taking at least a month. It takes about 2 hours and 5 beers or half a bottle of wine. I don't know which. But that's the process of going through this. They ask you a lot of questions. They're not trick questions. You know, have you been convicted of a felony? Is your business 51% U.S. owned? Are you actually owned by a Chinese venture capital firm? Things like that. They're all straightforward questions, but it is a long series of aggravating questions. They will ask you, this is a quad chart. This may come up as someone asking you to fill this out, but the purpose, it took me 2 weeks, like 10 business days. I did see something pop up there. Yes, you need a bank account, but you need a bank account to set up an EIN. You need a bank account to become a valid business. So yes. And yes, the amount of time it varies, but at the end of filling out the form, you need to send off the SAM.gov notarized letter to Lexington, Kentucky, I think. If you're going to be meeting with program managers, you should put together a summary for them. They see lots of things, but this sets up the standards. They may also just ask you for what your 3 aims are. I've seen different variations of like this, but here's the type of information that you would want to see and give them an idea of what they're talking about, because they will be able to answer questions, and this will set the process up. And every time you ask somebody to send up, you're going to get a Calendly link, and you'll be able to set up a time and get a half hour with them, because that's their job and they do it well. The question number 2, did you validate the problem with end users or payers? You talk to customers and say, this is what I'm using it, could use it for, this is what I need. And I would be interested in, they would be interested in using it if it did what it was promised.
And do you have to cite who it is?
You can describe it. When you're dealing with a program manager, it's more of a description of the fact that you did this research and that you know people that think this is an interesting idea. You don't need to describe the customer names or give out contacts when you're doing this to repeat what you said. The technology description. So market sizing, this is a critical part of your evaluation processes, because you're going to be defining several markets in what you're doing. In the case of a gentleman who's here, sorry, you're looking at a market for people who are looking to improve their strength. You also could be looking at a physical therapy market. You could also look for a surgical recovery market. You could look at the elderly market. All these things are different markets, and you say, I want to work on this one first, but these are the other markets that are out there. And you can break down the different markets and also break down what it's going to take to enter these things, who the players are, and how you're going to get it done. But you're describing a total market, and then you're breaking it down and saying, here's the other market, there's the multiple markets that you're targeting. If you put more than, how critical to the agencies are looking at the SAM and the TAM? If you put more than a paragraph in, you're wasting time. It's a summary, it's a quick thing that says, this is what I'm looking at, and this is a growing market. It's a paragraph. Do you know how I do these things?
I do.
Yes, I do the whole thing where you'll say, physical therapy market size, and then I'll get my paragraph out of that. Doesn't matter what the question is, there's always a market size answer. But I mean, I'm just saying, this is a short thing, you're mentioning it, it just demonstrates that you know what you're talking about. Because one of the critical things you do, and this becomes part of the process, he says extending his arms again, is that when you're looking up for the market sizing, you'll also get a name of potential customers as part of that report. Separately, you can look at those company names and say, how can I work with Schlumberger? How can I work with Mitsubishi? How can I work with GlaxoSmithKline? And then after I know that I'm going to be working with GlaxoSmithKline, who are the smaller companies I can work with? And now suddenly you're building up your target list of companies. But that's how you create those things, is you have your short paragraph of saying this is the market size, and then later on you can also identify the companies out of that report. So you kind of want to say this, the total global diabetes market is this big. We're looking at the type 2 market and looking at patients in ages X through Y with these conditions. And that's how you break it down when you're looking at the targeted market. So when you're looking at competitive projects, by the way, if somebody writes down, we have no competitors and nobody else has thought of what we're doing, that causes people to either put the thing aside or start looking at Facebook. It doesn't matter, because that's the wrong answer. It never is the right answer. You always have competitors, because one of your competitors is, I'm not doing anything at all. And that is an option for people. You also have to look at what is the cost of replacing a competitor, because if they already have stuff in there, they've already got capital, you know, what's it going to cost for them to remove it? And do they want to remove it? Are you providing a great enough of a story for them to get rid of it? Coming back to you, if the equipment is already on the floor, you're creating new equipment. So how do you fit new equipment into what they already have, or replace something in there? Aren't you glad you sat in the second row? They also want to know about your history of a company. You could be a startup and have nothing going on. You could be a company with with revenue skills. If you have a series of grants you've done successfully or created revenue, that also makes you look good. Project team, I think Jerry covered that pretty extensively, so I'm not going to spend more time in that, other than to say, you know, I got this one grant that I was reviewing, and part of the business development process, the guy said, we're just going to contact the people that we know, and that's how we're going to do business development. And I said, no, you can't do that. You actually have to have a business development process. You need to bring in someone to do business development. You can't sell this database function without this. Fast forward 6 months later, I get their reapplication and they ignored me. It's like, don't ignore me, okay? I sent the same note back, says you can't do this. You got to have someone who's actually doing the sales. This is not, I know people and I'm going to call my friends, because technical people like technical people, and they will always say nice things about technical things, but you're not getting to the purchasing people, you're not getting to the decision makers, you're not getting to anybody that's going to buy the thing. But anyway, don't mess with me when I'm on a grant review panel, because you know what? I'm not getting paid much money and I'm spending 2 days there. And it's Baltimore, by the way. Regulatory issues are obvious. IP strategy is very important. You can have trade secrets along with IP if you don't have IP, but having the IP, but also saying if there is IP created, what happens with the IP, that's a critical part of it. But trade secrets are a legitimate business model. What is the best slot? If you're doing a cancer technology, is it a medical device where you want to look at the medical device people, or is it cancer technology? Because if you're talking about the cancer technology, those people are interested in therapeutics, not devices. So if you have a medical device that deals with cancer, you want to talk to the device people. By the way, I said I have two superpowers. One was Bernie Schwartz. The second one is I beat cancer this year. So when you're doing your money on this thing, you have a 7% profit margin that you can build in. You can do anything you want with a 7% profit margin. That's very important because that's 7% of $300,000. That's $21,000, which you can shuffle things around in. You can also travel. Travel is fun because you can sit here in Las Vegas and say, I'm going to an event at the Javits Center in New York City. I'm going to fly into Newark and I'm going to pay that wonderful rate to get a cab from Newark to downtown Manhattan, which is about $175. And you can build all this into it. And you can put 5 trips in there and say, I've got $25,000 worth of spending. And then when you need to move money around, you can say, I'm only going to use 4 trips. And you can move the 5,000 somewhere else. Or if you need to do it again, you can move the 5,000 somewhere else on there. The important thing is when you're building in travel is that if you put in a trip, you can't go over the budgeted amount. So you're going to pad this thing. I've calculated that the cost of a trip to go to stay in Manhattan for a week and go to a Javits Center event was about $3,500 for this one project. So I put in 5,000. I mean, I knew the number was off, but they're only going to pay me the actuals. So there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing there. But the thing is left $5,000 in there that could be moved around. The PI is the only person who can't get moved around easily. Everything else is just funding that can be shoveled. Yes. So the people that you want to contact is you look up the topic and you find out who the person is managing the topic. If you're looking at an NIH, if you're looking at the NIH, you can find someone who is specializing in an elderly care, for cancer, for whatever it is. You find the program managers for that, and they're the people you talk to. These people are online. If you look up the agency by topic. Now, all these people know each other, and if you pick the wrong one, they'll send you to somebody else. And they'll share that information with you. Yes. What you should say if you're the only team member is you want to identify the roles of people that you're going to bring in addition to yourself.
Do they have to be actual people named?
They do not have to be. You do not have to name the actual people. You need to name the roles of saying, I need an accountant, I need a patent lawyer, I need a business development person, I need to identify the laboratory. Now, if it's just you, if it's just the one person, is this one person the lab for doing all the work? If they are not that person, then they really need to identify. The lab partner is going to be an important one because that's the PI.
Third question. Can I apply for several grants if I have other ideas?
Can you apply for several grants if you have other ideas? Oh, hell yes. So the way this works is if you win a couple of grants, you will have to do an accounting of who's spending money on what. You can't have 4 overhead rates if you happen to hit on 4 grants. And boy, if you hit on 4 grants, just wow. But let's just assume you hit, but they want to do an accounting and say, you have overhead 4 times, so we're going to pay overhead out of grant number 1, we're going to pay travel out of grant number 2, and so forth. There is an accounting of this. You're not going to jail. One of the critical things, though, is the PI. When we talked about that 51%, one of the key things in this process is that the PI cannot be the PI on multiple projects. The 51% matters for that. If you say you're going to be PI on 3 different projects, you can't get that done. That's 51% times 3. So you will get rejected if you use the same PI 3 times. They're not going to check your hours. They're not going to call you up. They're not going to look for proof. Sorry about the other person, but they're not the ex calling up and screaming about this sort of thing. It's not really going to happen, but the 51% matters because they don't want to see you on multiple things. Okay. So hotels and per diem rates are all these things are on the GSA travel schedule, which is online. And you'll put in the name of the city, and then the city will say, this is how much it costs for hotel rooms per night, and this is the per diem rate, and then you add coach, and then you just pad it with other things that you can think of. The key thing is budgets are planned, actual costs are billed. You are allowed to do an overhead rate. This is a second area of padding some funding. There's a thing called a de minimis rate, and 10% means they're not going to audit you. This is for administrative support, all of the other stuff that you can think of. If you're dealing with a NIH type thing where you have lab space, that's a directly billed item, or you may add to the overhead rate. If you're dealing with the university is going to have their own overhead rates, which get into the 50 to 70% rate. They have their own deal on that. I will get to that question in a second. The university overhead rates, since you're into trivia, is based on the fact that the university will negotiate with the federal government on how much it costs to operate the lights, the labs, the land, the people, the administration, and they will negotiate this for the entire university of saying it's 57.3%. And that's going to be all federal projects with the university is 57.3%. And if you try to talk them down off of that for your project, that means everything the university does has to be at the lower rate, and they're just not going to do that. So that's where the number comes from. It's negotiated annually between the university and the federal government for what the overhead rate is. As to the question, should I be talking to my people about being part of the project? Yes, you should. You can also make them part of the project, that they will tentatively be involved should the project go through. You can name them if they want to be named at that stage of the game. Again, this is a planning document, and if you put down someone and they decide to bail on you afterwards, then stuff happens. The PI is the key person in all this. Everyone else can be replaced. But yeah, if you can add names and make it look like you're a bigger company and that you know what you're doing, that's always a good thing. Okay, so that's where I mentioned for the university overhead. Excuse me. 58% at UT, 100% Harvard. I-Corps gives companies, startups like $50,000, and then they claw back about $15,000 because you're joining the program. Okay, revenue planning. Okay, so this is where I make money. You ready to make some money with me? All right, who's your customer? You got to break this down in detail. You do not say, I'm getting 2% of a $15 billion market, because that's crap. You need to say, I'm targeting these people. If you have software as a service as your technology, you can go in and you're going to be, who are you going to be selling to? You're going to be selling to the project manager at GlaxoSmithKline for this project, and they're going to buy 10 licenses from you to do your software as a SaaS model. Then you're going to sell 10 more licenses to project 2 and project 3, and then to another program manager and to another program manager and so forth. And that's how you're going to make money, is because you're going to sell a SaaS model to program managers, and you're not going to go through corporate IT, because I can tell you, you don't want to talk to corporate IT. They're just animals. But you want to break it down and say, I'm talking to the program manager. I'm going to sell it to the program manager because their budget authority is $25,000, and I'm selling this for $20,000, and they can buy this. You also want to look at your customers and say, is this part of a larger project? If it's part of a larger project, maybe you need to be part of somebody else's bid. Maybe you need to be added into somebody else's system. One of the big things that people miss out on is that everyone's storing things in the cloud, and finding an Amazon cloud or a Google cloud or an IBM cloud partner to sell your software because your data is in their cloud is a missed opportunity for a lot of people. They don't see this. The bottom line is you got to find the individual people you're selling to. You can't say, I'm going to sell to GlaxoSmithKline. You got to break it down and say, the people who are working on a hepatitis B vaccine, I'm going to focus on those program managers. That's how you get into sales. What's the budget authority on whether they have capital or expense authority? This is also important because if your project has a large amount of hardware, you might want to lease it to them. And there's a whole lot of leasing programs that are out there that you can check out, but that'd be a way of selling to the company under the grant where you're leasing the equipment or they're going to lease the equipment from you. You can sell many times to the same organization under these models. And that's critical because if there's somebody at GlaxoSmithKline likes you and they start telling more about you, these are more sales opportunities. You can spend 3 years trying to sell $200,000 worth of software, or you can sell $10,000, $20,000 licenses and do it again next year and then again the year after that. So what are you selling? You're selling if you're selling a software product, you're also selling the consulting, how to implement it, how to support it, answering their questions, and the cost of software rises year after year. You also have the warranty, you also have updates, you have modifications, you have a lot of stuff in there, but this is how you create an income level. If you're selling a piece of hardware, you got to replace the hardware if something breaks. How are you going to handle that? Are you going to cross ship? Are you going to send somebody? Do you set it up with a distributor who's going to have an emergency set? This is something, again. Licensing. When you're selling software, if you sell a licensing agreement to somebody, you have to agree to being allowed to see their audited financials. So if you're going to say SmithKline is going to put it out there for all of their hepatitis B patients, then you're allowed to see SmithKline's audited financials on how many Hep B patients they have they're working the studies on. And guess what? That's not going to happen. So what they're going to negotiate with you is a thing called a fully paid up license, in which they're going to pay you once a larger sum of money, and they're going to say, this is ours from here on out. A fully paid up license is part of the business model, but this is different ways of structuring licensing agreements with software. So when you're doing with the sales, you can say, I'm selling to this program manager once in year 1, and then in year 2, there's going to be 3 more projects, and in year 3, there's going to be 3 more projects after that. So in year 3, I'm selling 7 license sets to GlaxoSmithKline. At the same time, I've got 2 other companies I'm doing the same thing with. So year 1, I've got 3, year 2, I have 12, and year 3, I have 15. Something like that, whatever. So you can build these things up and build a revenue model based on that, where you're looking at the number of people you're dealing with, how you increase the sales within these companies, and how you grow your business model. When you're doing this, you want to be conservative. You want the reviewers to say, you know what, you can do more. One of the worst things, I had a guy who was selling a $300 software package, and he knew exactly by year 5 he was going to sell $115 million worth of these things. And I just gave up after like 15 minutes of, no, you're not. No, you're not. But he felt he could sell $300 a pop, because he said anytime he calls somebody, he said they're going to want to use his software. And I said, no, they aren't. I work with this group of people, and we have a competitive product to what he was doing. And I said, you know why we picked this product? He said, why? And he says, because the person who was making the decision said she knew that product and she wanted to use it. and you weren't even part of the discussion. And, you know, he did not understand the business process, but he felt he could get $115 million in sales. So I screamed at him. I felt better. So you want to name the customers, you name the contact points, the types of sales, their locations. Hey, guess what? I have 15,000 LinkedIn connections. I know how to find people who are going to be making these decisions, and I can show you how to connect with them. Lots of people can do this as well. I'm just saying you need to say, I can find the person looking at new technologies at Schlumberger. I can find the person looking at Hep B vaccine programs at GlaxoSmithKline. You got to find the individuals, and that's how you make the money, and that's how you get started and turn this into something. So I have 40 customers. I will close them for them per year for the next 5 years. It's worth this much in year 1, year 2, and here's my 10-year revenue plan. And for those of you who thought you would never see the quadratic equation again, there it is. So before I jump into some other topic areas, I want to share with you one final slide. This one. My daughter sent this to me one year. Actually, I had to clean it up because it was a little off. Yeah. Anyway, this is a legitimate chessboard for those of you who play chess. Do you know why? Because the white knight advanced and then retreated. You can't lose your nerve. This is entrepreneurship. This is, you go big, go early, go home. You got to get fully into it, because you know what? If it doesn't work out, you got to do the next thing, and you got to do the thing after that. I was working with this one guy, and we had a falling out. The business collapsed overnight, and I went to a happy hour the next day, pissed off out of my mind. And this one guy said, I don't care. What are you doing next? And he was right. And by the way, this is the guy who invented Ethernet. So it was a pretty big deal. So that's the thing, is you've got to take risks. You've got to move quickly. No matter what it is you're looking at, you got to jump on it now, because you don't really have 4 years to figure it out. You've got to get in front of people, and if they say no, figure out why, and then change your pitch. And then if they just say, if it doesn't work again, change your pitch again, and see what you can have done. Because what you learn, what you gain in experience, what you gain in technology, will bring you fruit, and it will give you other chances to do things. Let me run through some of the notes that I was talking about there. We talked about overhead rates and profit margins, travel expenses, success fees are not a good idea. If you're ever dealing with somebody who says they want to get paid on success. My business model is very simple. I will work with companies in the beginning at no charge, because I want to figure out if there's an opportunity to work with you. I want to figure out if there's a grant out there, if the grant is of interest to the agencies, if there's a chance to start. There are ways of making money called, the technology is known as OPM, or other people's money. If you're old enough, Bob Seger's album from years ago was Smoking OPs. Nobody? Smoking other people's cigarettes. Anyway, the whole idea is there's ways of helping you out and using other funding. We talked briefly about TABA, but I want to take a few minutes on this one. TABA is the Technical Assistance and Business Administration Fund. When you are successful in a phase 1 project, it's $6,500. If you're successful in a phase 2 project, it's $50,000. Most startups don't care about this. This is a mistake. This is a very big mistake. One of the people who talked the gentleman from this morning talked about that you can't use your grant funding to pay for patent costs. He's correct, but you can use your TABA money for patent costs. And so if you ignore the TABA part of your application on the phase 1 or phase 2, you are ceding $6,500 or $50,000 to an outside consulting firm, most of which I work with or know, or it could even be to me. Lucky me. But the point is that you take this $50,000 and say, I need $25,000 reserved for patent costs. And so then there's only $25,000 business development. You can make that decision when you're filling out the grant application. This is very important, because you need to figure out what you need to do. But that TABA grant funding is very, very important. And this is the money that's spent not as a reward, but as consulting services that are being conducted to help people figure out who the markets are, who to connect with, reaching out to startups, what the business model needs to look like, what the product needs to look like, what the licensing strategy is. If you're working on your pitch deck for the venture capitalists, there's all these things that can be done under TABA to help you, but you got to be proactive and you got to do it on the front end. And you've got to specify how that's going to work. Otherwise, it goes somewhere else. So I work with, go ahead. Question. The question was, what do I mean by don't pay for success? Is someone, you don't want someone to say, I'm going to help you, and then if you get the grant, you're going to pay me $5,000. You don't want to get involved in those things. They don't like it as part of your grant costs. You can give it out as part of your profit or your overhead, but you really don't want to do that. You don't want to pay for the grant costs. No, I don't think it's a good strategy. I think most companies, well, me and others, work on the idea that you're going to make me your TABA partner if you're successful. And again, that's not a fee for success. That is services that need to be offered and delivered upon, that are in fact audited and tracked by the agencies. So that's a better way to go. Okay, notes on filling out the application form. Some of this was covered in this morning, and they were correct. When you're filling out your application form, especially in the scientific area, when I'm on grant review panels, I have 8 of them I have to fill out now for a meeting that's going to take place in early November. I'm getting $750 to do this, or maybe $500, it depends. But either way, it's not a lot of money. I'm not going to read 110 pages. I have to work on the commercialization section, which means there's a transition plan in the middle of the document that I'm going to read and focus on. You need, when you're writing these grants out, is to duplicate information in multiple sections. You want to explain what the tech is in different areas, because the people who are reading this are not going to read the whole thing over, they're not going to read the whole thing all the way through. They're going to grab their section and try to make sense of it. We sat in one meeting and the person said there was no transition plan, and there actually was. They just didn't call it a transition plan. They called it something else. And they just did a search and couldn't find transition plan and said they didn't have one. But people are reading sections. You want to make sure that that section is standalone and explains enough about it so that people have an idea of what they're looking at and how they're taking care of it. Be repetitive. Secondly, in the very beginning, you want to say, this is what the technology is. It's very important because you want them to keep reading it. I've reviewed proposals where they spent a page and a half explaining markets and sizes and all these other things. And then at the bottom of page 2, they started explaining what the technology is. It's like, no, the tech goes to the beginning. You really want to make it a push so that someone sees what they're talking about in the very beginning. That's a key aspect of this. So that's me. I accept all LinkedIn connections. If you want to talk about a technology or an idea, I'll be happy to take the call and just chat about what you're trying to do and trying to figure out if there's a strategy to move forward. Whatever needs to happen. If you go through Cara, I will send her this presentation so you can have your own copy of it, along with a picture of me and Stephen Hawking, because that makes it more valuable. And we can go from there. The last thing is that the company name is the Neutrino Donut. I was trying to name the company and needed Technology Associates or something, didn't work. And so the Higgs boson stuff was happening at the time, and I was looking for puns on neutrinos, and donut stands for the direct observation and the neutrino tau, which leads to 2 stories. One, the Kip Thorne, who was Stephen Hawking's buddy at Caltech, thought it was funny, and he's a Nobel Prize winner, so there's that. Secondly, somebody, in talking about Duns and things like that, somebody put me down as a pastry shop owner, and I got audited. And because they want to know why a pastry shop had consulting and legal fees. And so anyway, after I told her, she went, ha, that's really funny, but we're still doing it. She found me $300. Nice lady, very helpful, but they had no choice. Once they start the audit, they just can't kill it. But anyway, that's where the Neutrino Donut came from. And I look forward to talking with any of y'all, anyone who wants to connect with me. There's my information. Send me LinkedIn, send me whatever, and we can go from there.
Right.
Okay. For the SBIR website, they said a nonprofit cannot apply for it, but they can do the work. And the subcontracting all has to be within the U.S. now. That's a more strict rule. They used to allow you to do the subcontracting internationally, but not anymore.
Earle, thank you so much for your presentation today.